going on, man? Charlie in the box. Check it out. Look at what I got in my box today. Is actually something. I took a trip to Washington, right? And while I was walking to the Capitol, I seen our president drop something, right? So I picked it up and I hid it. And see, our politicians, they go by a different set of rules than we do as American public. They get away with stuff that us as average people don't get away with. Just like the way they spend our money as Americans, they don't spend their money the same way. They have different sets of rules for us and them. And when I seen Obama walk by, he dropped this. And it's something that I know he kind of misses, and I bet you he hasn't told anybody that he's lost it because he'd probably get us in trouble. But it's like this. See, heads, we win. That's the Fed. They win. And tails, you lose as the American public. And I'm going to show you how they use this coin. So come with me and check this out. As long as Americans are too busy to ever really comprehend what's at stake right now, their lives, their country, their children's future, and everything that we hold dear, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans believe this sign, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans keep their head in the sand, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't have common sense, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't care to understand that our country's falling apart as we know it, and people don't want us to have our liberties and freedoms that were granted to us by our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence, heads they win, tails we lose our country. When our city, state, and federal government gives them a pay increase, and we as average citizens take a pay cut, heads they win, tails you lose. As long as the American public doesn't understand the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with our federal government, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't educate themselves to know what politics are and what our politicians are doing, heads they win, tails we lose. We as Americans don't stop fighting against each other and start supporting one another, we as Americans will always fail and lose what is dear to us. Like in Arizona, those people, all they want is to secure the borders and make sure their families are taken care of. And if we as Americans don't stand together, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans stand by and let their children's future be eroded away, heads they win, tails we lose. When we as Americans finally understand what the federal government's doing to the average citizens and the state by seizing their land, eminent domain, and taking all our natural resources, they're going to continuously build a bigger government and sell off this country to foreign interests. And heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans are too busy to figure out what the politicians are doing, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as the American people continuously believe the lies that the banks needed a bailout, the recession's over, and all this had to happen, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans allow lobbyists to lobby our politicians, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as the American public believes that healthcare reform was there to make sure every American was covered with healthcare and not understand that it was to take away all privatized healthcare and get us to socialized medicine, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans keep paying their Social Security knowing that it isn't going to be there for them when it's time for them to retire, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't go out to the tea parties and support them, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as the American public lets the federal government print money it doesn't have, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't look up to see what they're spraying in our atmosphere, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans never question why things are being done the way they are, and the people on the left that are yelling at the people on the right, and the people on the right that are yelling at the people on the left, that they're both serving the same masters, and the American public does not put these pieces together to the puzzle that are tearing apart this country, heads they win, tails we lose our country again. As long as the American public lets our politicians do as they please, heads they win, tails our kids lose. As long as Americans keep eating the BS that the federal government feeds them, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't care about their children's future and what these politicians are doing to their future, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans keep taking those vaccines and never question what's in them, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't care to understand that there's people within our politicians, people within our borders that want to tear apart this country and don't want them to have the freedoms and liberties, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans allow our politicians to run up the debt, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans really don't pay attention that the bailouts that the banks got, that they're actually not helping no Americans to stay in their home, just to pocket all that money, heads they win, tails you lose your house. As long as the American public doesn't realize the Democrat Party is actually a wolf in sheep's clothing, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as the American public really doesn't question why their government lets a private company buy vans that can x-ray through the walls of their house to see what they're doing inside their private home, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans really don't understand that they're going to be accountable for this debt our federal government's accumulating, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as the American public doesn't really understand what the federal government's doing to their schools, heads they win, tails we lose. As long as Americans don't care to know their history, like one of the presidents segregated America. Back in the days, America wasn't segregated. Whites weren't separated from blacks. But one of their actual presidents did that because he didn't like black people. Heads they win, tails we lose. Educate yourself. As long as Americans really don't question why we send over 1,000 troops to Pakistan to help them with their problems, and we don't defend our own state called Arizona, heads they win, tails we lose. Oops. Heads we win, tails they lose. Alright, when you got politicians like Mr. Shoemaker right here, that's just an average American that is finally getting fed up with the state and federal governments doing to its citizen and laws and taxes imposed on the average citizen, and you don't educate yourself to find these type of people, heads they win, tails you lose. And who do I mean by they? I mean big government, special interests, global corporations, and the unions. These are the type of organizations that are choosing to enslave the American people and to get us away from our Constitution or Declaration of Independence and freedom as we know it. And if I have anything to do with this, I'm going to wake up as many of my Americans as possible. So I tell you again, like every other time, if you're not doing everything in your power to restore this country, you're doing everything in your power to destroy it. Charlie in the out.